In this module, we're going to discuss reading comprehension as one of the 5 components of reading development. This is the 5th and final pillar that the National Reading Panel has outlined for us as a crucial component in reading instruction. As always, we want to ensure that our research aligns to those students who we are actually supporting. So we need to think beyond just the National Reading Panel, especially when considering our students who come from culturally and linguistically diverse homes. Reading comprehension is understanding the meaning of the text. It's the reason we read. We want to understand what we're reading. And readers who have strong comprehension are able to draw conclusions about what they read. Now, comprehension development begins very early. In the early stages, we think of comprehension of oral and spoken language, phonological awareness, even comprehending the visual cues that help us to understand text using pictures for comprehension. Starting to develop deeper comprehension through having students at all levels, even as young as preschoolers, questioning and responding to texts. Making connections. We deepen this as students get older, but even with our youngest students, we want them to start to make connections between the text and their self. I like to use a visual kinesthetic component with my students, so if we're doing a read aloud or if it's not an appropriate time where you want students interrupting, they can just let me know that they have a connection, a text-to-self connection, by holding their hands up like this. And another final component of early reading comprehension is starting to predict. I have my students show me that they're really doing a great job predicting by just pointing to their brain so they can show me, I think I know what will happen next. And I reinforce that when I pose a prediction question to them by pointing to my brain in the same way. Reader, what do you think will happen next? And modeling for them how I go through my thought process of predicting. Thinking aloud is one of the most crucial strategies we as teachers can use to teach our students comprehension. A great comprehension strategy that sometimes gets overlooked is what we can do before we even start introducing the actual text. We need to focus on what our students may already know that could help them comprehend, really building on their background knowledge. So before even starting a unit, we may want to elicit from our students what connections they may have to a topic. And with a book, doing a unit or a chapter walkthrough, previewing what we're going to be reading. In a picture book, you can walk through the illustrations and pose some questions before we've ever gotten to the text. And even in a textbook, the same concept could be applied by looking at some of the visuals that the author has included. For students who are English language learners, we can also preview the information in their first language and help them to make connections. So if the text is about fairs, for example, we may want to ask students to think of fairs that they have been to. I think it's really important to also think about our students who may not be able to tell you that they have connections. I think a lot about my students on the autism spectrum and how many of them may have a connection but may not be able to tell me, or other students with different communication disabilities. And so I often like to start a new unit by sending a letter home to families in all languages to tell them that if there are connections, to make me aware, or to send in pictures so that we have multiple ways of sharing with each other that we have background knowledge. It's a way for a student to share with their peers that they have a text-to-self connection, but it also has a dual purpose of reminding that student about the connection that they have. An example is when we read a wonderful story about the beach, and my student Martine, who has autism, had that picture of his day at the beach with him. He used it as a bookmark, and it was wonderful for him to reference the picture, and you saw what was happening for him when he remembered. It was clear that his senses came alive when he looked at that picture, and we got some of the best demonstrations of comprehension during that unit. I believe he had that comprehension all along, but wasn't always able to show us. But through background knowledge, we were able to draw it out in a more powerful way for him. Or another example, if the text is about science, they can connect pictures and visuals to their own experiences or things happening in other classes. What a great way to collaborate with your colleagues and create experiences. Not all students will come with an experience like Martine where he's been to the beach. You can't make those assumptions that every student would have had those shared experiences, but we can create them through lessons in another class, lessons in your own, or even if the resources are available to create a field trip that would relate. Another crucial piece of ensuring that our students are comprehending and that we are teaching and building that skill is to check comprehension frequently. Too often, I'll watch a lesson and have a teacher wait until the end of the story to pose questions to her students or his students. And so I think it's important that we think about asking questions in the beginning, even before we start, during, and at the end. As students read, ask them open-ended questions about their reading. I also think that it's important as students get older that we help them to do this for themselves. So very often if I've assigned a reading for homework and maybe they're doing independent reading, I encourage students at the end of each chapter to do just a quick summary on a post-it. And then that post-it serves both as a check for their comprehension, but also the next day I can do a quick check and make sure they've completed post-its to know that they did their reading assignment. Informally, test students' ability to sequence material. That's a great way to test for comprehension. You can scaffold this in many ways if it's not only able to be done orally. Print out sentences from a section of the story on paper strips and perhaps mix them up and then have the student organize. If the student's not yet reading printed language, this can be done with pictures. So there's many ways that a student could demonstrate for us that they understand the sequence and comprehend what's happening in the story. After reading, it's so important also that we follow up with comprehension to ensure that the full story was understood. Those questions could be at the literal level. Why do the leaves turn red and yellow in the fall? At an interpretive level, why do you think the plant needs water? Or even applied, how much water are you going to give it and why? It's so crucial that as we've worked to build our students to become independent readers from all the steps that the National Reading Panel outlined, that we not forget this final component of reading comprehension, which again is the reason we all want to read.